Lovely to see you, and thank you so much for coming. But it may not be numbers, but it's definitely quality in the room. So we do thank you, and I do thank you for those who've managed to do all 4 of these sessions. It's been the first time we've done them, so we will be getting in touch with you to ask you how we can actually make them better, what other things we should be looking at. But I'm really delighted that we've got 2 of the most amazing people in the room, apart from Rachel and I, of course. We already know we're amazing. But it's Nicola Triscott and Simon McKeown, who has just become Professor Simon McKeown. Only last week he was awarded that status. And I think you've just said that you're the first disability person outside the disability studies things, because there's a few there, Professor Colin Barnes and things, who've actually managed to get to that status. So congratulations and well deserved. Yeah, but Simon and I go back quite a few years. I worked with him in my previous job in Liverpool in DataFest. And ironically, we linked in with FACT in Liverpool with some of the work we did. And I'm just so delighted that Nicola Triscott is actually now the new artistic director of FACT, and has moved to Liverpool whilst I've come here to Cardiff. So we've missed each other, though we've worked with each other in the past. So I'm really glad you 2 can connect, because Simon loves Liverpool, and if you could, you probably would live there, wouldn't you? Yeah. But maybe I can pull you into coming to Wales at some point in the future as well. So, but I've worked with them over the years, and particularly with Nicola, we created a film programme in DataFest with a lot of the participants there, working with Toxter TV and using the media there, and that was really quite an exciting programme. The films are still somewhere out there in virtual cyberland that can be seen. But as she's moved to take on this new role, in fact, it will be really interesting to see how she's going to use some of the experiences she's worked with within the disability world into her work. But before we go into the details of that, I'm going to give you both a bit of time to explain exactly what your role is and what you're looking to achieve, and then do a bit more in-depth conversation. Is that okay? Yeah. So can I ask Nicola to go first?
Sure.
In fact, thank you.
So I don't have much to say. So I'm the new chief executive, and as Ruth said, the artistic director of FACT now, and I've been in post for just over a year. And I came from running my own company, which was Arts Catalyst in London for 25 years. And that really focused on art, science and technology, more as thinking about what science and technology mean within society and within culture. And so moving to FACT was really exciting for me, because first, it's great to move to Liverpool. I think it's such an exciting city, so that was quite a buzz. And FACT is just an amazing institution, so that was an honor. But also just the opportunity to really focus on artists working with creative technology in some detail was quite appealing to me. I'd been straddling quite a number of different worlds, I think, at Arts Catalyst, from kind of science and society to creative tech. So although I bring those different backgrounds with me to FACT, to be able to really focus on moving image and new media art is exciting. And definitely diversifying the artists that we work with, and really working particularly with younger artists and emerging artists, which was something that I announced as a policy when I moved into the organisation, but feels hugely important now as we've moved into the pandemic and the lockdown, and then we'll come into a recession, and it's going to hit younger people hardest and young emerging artists and professionals hardest. So it feels a very appropriate thing to be doing. I'll shut up there. I'll talk more about what we've been doing during lockdown later.
Okay, that probably will come into it, because we are finding the pandemic has actually changed our lives, and there's the real issues for us as disabled people. But Simon, would you mind giving us an overview of what you do, and just fill us in? Thank you.
Sure. Well, my name's Simon McKeown. I'm a disabled artist, and by that I mean I have a few conditions, and one of which is brittle bones, and so I break bones more easily than most people. And that kind of experience has informed all of my life. And so, for instance, it made me creative when I was younger, when I was unable to go out and play football and do that kind of thing. So I always knew I wanted to be an artist from being, quite young. Um, I then, when I was doing a degree in fine art, which was quite an unusual thing at the time, the university that I was at bought some early tech kit, so some very early 3D computers, way before Toy Story, and so I was enthralled by these. I loved photography and I liked filmmaking, but I actually loved the whole 3D aspect as well. So with a friend of mine, we taught ourselves very early 3D computing, and this is in the late 1980s. And from there, we both went on and worked in London in the developing post-production industry, worked on loads of really exciting special effects films and all kinds of different things. And then I dropped all of that and moved into computer games, and I worked in computer games for quite a while at a really in some really big companies at a high level, and really enjoyed that. And then I quit all that to join Teesside University and really concentrate on making my own artwork. So I went back to fine art, but took all of that digital experience that I gained and took that into making my own artwork. And so in 2009, I created one of the first motion captured works around disability. So I took 14 disabled people, including performer Claire Cunningham, Matt Fraser, well-known people now, and worked with them to create motion capture of their different bodies, which I found beautiful. My body doesn't move in the same way as everybody else's, and I took their bodies and worked with the fact they had different limbs or missing limbs, or just differences basically, and created a very successful exhibition that Ruth was part of supporting, that's been shown in multiple locations around the world, and was celebratory for in 2010. It was again with Ruth, was shown in 17 countries in celebration of the United December the 3rd sort of celebration of disability with the United Nations. And I was working with Teesside University to do that, because to do what I do, I need teams of people and I need lots of expensive equipment, or certainly equipment that was expensive then. And so I've worked with lots of people and worked very collaboratively. And as part of Motion Disabled at the time, I thought, right, I was asked in a talk, what did I want to do next with it? And I said I wanted to do an outdoor projection. And that led to my work being shown at Light Night Leeds. And then from there, I got really interested in the whole outdoor experience, and then worked extensively in Ireland to produce a massive outdoor spectacle. But I'm very keen on collaboration, so although it was a big outdoor spectacle, I worked with a group of 15 disabled artists in Cork in Ireland to create a 30-minute show where we closed the entire centre of Cork. We were supported by the City Council, we were supported by the fire service, all kinds of different organisations came on board this project. The Cork College of Commerce, just to let me shut the city centre down. And what was strange about that was nobody wanted to see the work before I actually pressed play, which was a very unusual position when you've convinced people to shut everything down, but nobody has seen what you're going to do. And it was a fantastic experience, and I really enjoyed it. And then working with Patrick Fox, who used to work at FACT, who now runs Heart of Glass in St Helens, and Heart of Glass are a very collaborative agency that's central to what they do. I worked over a year to produce a celebratory event for the 150th anniversary of St Helens, again, this time with a group of disabled artists who were specifically learning disabled artists from an organisation called BuzzHub. And we're using massive technology, many outdoor projectors, some of the best technicians in the field, who work on the Commonwealth Games and some of the biggest shows in Britain. You know, these were people coming back from touring any of the big names like Beyonce and stuff like that, and they were coming back to work with us in St Helens or in Cork. It was brilliant. So I love the idea that I can use my knowledge of technology to take a group of people who were often ignored, who were often at the lower end of, seen at the lower end of things in many different ways, and actually flip that and present it and take over a city centre and do something sort of quite grand with it and quite fun and very collaborative. And so that's what I do. And I also sit on various committees to do with equality, diversity, inclusion. So I'm very committed to the art side, but I'm also very committed to detail. So I sit with UK, I'm on an external advisory group for equality, diversity and inclusion with UK Research and Innovation, which is the highest level of research in the UK. It's the government funding body for research. And I'm sitting there arguing the case primarily in my case, for disabled people to be included in the research and development process that occurs in the UK.
Yeah, thank you. That you gave us a good scoop, but you teach, don't you? You're a lecturer?
That's right, yes.
Day job.
I'm part of the MEMA School of Art and Design at Teesside University. MEMA is the Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art. It's a national portfolio organisation for the Arts Council. But it's also part of Teesside University, so I teach there as well. And of course, I teach with a lot of technology as well as traditional practice. Obviously, I came through traditional fine art practice of drawing, painting, sculpture, and so on. So I can talk about artists and history and that kind of thing. In fact, I did a lecture the other day on wallpaper, which was great fun. I know a lot about wallpaper now. So, but I love technology, so that's one of my main focus.
Right. Okay. Wow. So much there. Nicola, Simon gave us a bit more about his background and how he got into doing the work he's doing now. But what got you into doing work around film and eventually leading you to this job? Was this something you always wanted to do in the arts, and you did a degree and it exposed you to new experiences?
Gosh, you never know how you're going to go on in life, do you? No. You kind of fall into things. So my degree is kind of irrelevant to where I went. I mean, I started reading physics, and then so science was always really interesting to me, and then I did a degree in political geography. So how people are positioned in the world and how we use the land that we're on has always been a great interest of mine. So, and I always loved art, so I did art A-level as well. So what do you do if you're interested in art, science, politics, technology, culture? Well, eventually you set up your own company because no one else is going to let you have that much fun. I remember my mum saying only you could have made a career out of that kind of wild set of interests that you have. But I think the thing that's just driven me has been the conversations I've had with artists. So it's always been like, I think Hans Ulrich Obrist many years ago said it's like a fencing competition, but I've never thought of it as a competition. It's more like a dance. Yes. It's more like the dance that you play with artists so that they prod you and you prod them a bit. And there are some artists that I've had very kind of long relationships with over long periods of time. So how I've got to where I have been is just kind of following my nose and following things that make me go, ooh, and following artists and then kind of going, why don't we try this? Have you thought about that? What can I say? That's where that's how I got where I am.
Right, okay. Because I think what's interesting with your background, the barriers are being blurred so much with art now, particularly through technology opportunities. Art used to be so siloed, you know, you're performance art, you're a musician, you're a visual artist working in that medium. But now people are starting to really expand and see those lines blurred. And no more is it happening more than in the creative technology field. I mean, you're talking about being physics and things. One of my favourite artists is Golan Levin. and he's a scientist who creates art from a scientific basis, and it's so exciting because it's interactive. But I think we're coming into this conversation from the lens of disability, really, because many of us have not had those opportunities or been taken seriously as artists. I mean, Simon, you are a real motivator for us because you've been able to pave a way. But I am very aware how much of the wake you create that people can follow. And you're talking about young people. There's so much we need to do to make those opportunities happen. And I am waffling a bit, but I want to come back to a question to ask you around what creative technologies is actually doing now to make art more accessible for us as disabled people. How we can actually call a shot in what we create and make. The last few sessions you've had, this is a fourth of four sessions, obviously. We've had artists showing how they've used new technologies to either embed them into ceramics or to create things that can help people who have different impairment issues in their life, through to looking at how some people with dementia can benefit from augmented reality and things like this. But we can be put off because we don't think we've got the technical know-how, but also it can be seen that creative technology is the answer to all our problems as disabled people. So I wonder if you've got some views on that and what you see disability artists can actually do through creative technologies, and how we can change some of the messages about the access of it. Access not just in terms of what we need as disabled people, but the funding, the cost, that sort of thing. Anyone want to kick us off on that?
I think the lockdown's been very interesting because I think it's shifted people's perceptions of their worlds into a different sphere. And there's been a lot of conversation that we're now experiencing more what a lot of disabled people experience, which is a much more kind of enclosed world physically, and the world then opens up through online technology. And that's been interesting. So we went straight into a series of new online commissions, which were residencies for artists online. So we work with this group of emerging artists. We put out an open call and we work with them online now. And this idea of an online residency and being able to work with anybody, anywhere, is something that's become very exciting, because I think it's worked really well, and it's worked really well in terms of bringing together a cohort of emerging artists as well. So it's more than just the money that we're giving them, and it's more than just the mentoring and the opportunity and the platform that we're giving them, but it's developing this cohort who can go on a journey together and can support each other as well. And so even when we come out of lockdown, this is a model that we want to go on doing in future years, because I think it provides a lot more access and inclusion to people who would not perhaps physically be able to come into the FACT building that easily. I mean, and you'll know in Liverpool, just getting around Liverpool as a person with mobility difficulties is almost impossible due to the pavement parking culture. Quite apart from anything else. So that's one thing that's interesting. The other thing I've been thinking about quite a bit is around virtual reality, because FACT has done a lot of stuff on virtual reality, and of course as we open the new exhibition, we're having to rip out all the VR stuff and the touch-based interactive stuff. So what do you do then to give these kind of deep, embedded, immersive sensory experiences to people? And I'm really excited by augmented reality technologies and kind of cheap and cheerful VR. None of it's ever cheap and cheerful, of course. But I did a project as Arts Catalyst where we worked with some displaced people from Fukushima, working with a group of artists, making a VR piece around the exclusion zone in Fukushima. And they were just using iPhones, basically the 3D of iPhones, to make the VR work, and then making headsets out of papier-mâché. And I've also been reading about a company that's now promoting VR films at home, and they just send out a kind of a cardboard headset and you put your phone in it. So It's not super cheap if we're talking about digital poverty, but it's a lot more than it's a lot cheaper than an Oculus Rift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Simon, you'll have a lot more knowledge than me on this stuff, clearly.
Can you add some thinking on that?
Yeah, I mean, so Nicola, Ruth, what I'd like to go back to is how we actually include people. So what I'm interested in doing as an inclusive thing is, I really do enjoy, and I've always worked with people with, and been friends with people with learning disabilities since I was a child. And yet I've always been struck by the fact that they're excluded from mainstream education and often excluded from contributions to museums, galleries and culture generally. And so I'm interested now we actually change that. And one of my favourite artists who I had the great privilege to exhibit with in 2010 is a deaf Down syndrome artist who unfortunately passed away in 2005. He's called Judith Scott. And Judith Scott is a fibre artist, and her work is absolutely stunning. And if you look at Judith Scott's work, you can clearly see that not only did she deserve a degree, she deserved a PhD, but this is somebody who couldn't communicate particularly, didn't sign and didn't speak any language because she'd been excluded from the learning of language since she was a child. And for me, that's a really interesting problem. How do universities tackle that issue and actually become, we adopt so much of our educational process from other systems like medicine and law and business and so on. How should art and design do things differently, and should it at all? Now I would argue that we should approach learning and qualifications completely differently and standards completely differently. And so with these new processes, for instance, in the work I mentioned earlier with Cork Ignite, I was actually ill during the process of Cork Ignite, so the project was delayed for a year. But in that time, we set up a music group, and the music group worked with assistive technology. And it was a real mix of people in that music group. And the only thing I was able to do, because I was quite ill, was said, create me 2 pieces of music that I respond to. Oh, sorry, 1 piece of music that I respond to, and I'll give you an animation that you respond to. And so that music group, independently, with some assistance from other musicians, created me 2 pieces of work that then became central to the whole event itself. That they weren't edited by me; they were just used completely and as they were. And the technology enabled, for instance, many of the users in that group to compose and to really think about the structure and how the work was made. But critically, also, I don't think what I didn't do was compare that to sending that out to a professional composer, because that wasn't my interest, or I didn't think it was, for me, it just wasn't important that I did a like-for-like comparison, because there isn't a comparison, it's just a different process and a different way of being. So I think that was really interesting, and it worked really, really well. And I think there's some other technology that's really useful, which is becoming really inexpensive. The first one is photogrammetry, in the way that we can recreate digital spaces using camera technology. So when I did Cork Ignite, I used 3D laser scanning to scan this huge building that I was projecting on. But when I did the project in St Helens near Liverpool, I actually used photographs to scan the building instead. And from the photographs, you can recreate 3D buildings and 3D spaces and 3D locations and objects. And I actually created the entire facade of the St Helens Town Hall with it. But I'm now using that very simple process to recreate a food box. My next digital project is all about the food boxes that I have received as part of the pandemic as somebody who's shielding. And it was by accident. I had difficulty getting food originally, and it became a regular thing. And so I'm now taking these food boxes and turning them into a digital installation with audio connected to the whole pandemic. And I'll do that with photogrammetry, and it's a wonderful kind of small tool that you can do fairly inexpensively. And I think the last thing about virtual reality is it's a wonderful development tool. And I think what we don't realize, I've done a piece of work few years ago called Preserve Memories. And that's all about how in the future our memories will be so entwined with big data that we won't digitally die, and we'll be able to be digitally active when we're dead. So you will be able to, your great-great-granddaughter will be able to chat with you at whatever age they select. So they'll be able to chat with you at 20, 30 or 40 or whatever. And you will know as your digital avatar that they've just passed an exam, ditched the boyfriend or whatever. And that kind of technology mixed with AR, mixed with new forms of projection that you can touch. You know, we're very close to having touchable projections. We've got holographic displays already, and scientifically we're now at the point where you can touch holographic displays. And that then becomes a really interesting issue, because one of the interesting things for me in the pandemic is how did people, my neighbour said this to actually said this to me, which was quite funny. She said, how are people managing who are having affairs during the pandemic, during lockdown? And then that raises the whole issue. You know, we talk about social distancing being an issue and so on, but how does the future look in terms of relationships and sex and personal relationships? And then we can look at the Demolition Man film, where there's, we've got bizarre ideas of putting headsets on, which look very much like an Oculus Rift now. And so I'm writing and creating works about how our technology will enable long distance connections using touch and so on. So there's a few things into the mix.
You have thrown a lot of things in there. One of the things I'd like you to just explain a bit more is how photogrammetry works, so we understand it. Because one of the problems with technologists like yourselves is you can throw out all these phrases and we can pretend we understand, but we don't really. So just give us a bit of analysis on that, and then I want to come in with something else.
Yeah, it's really, so what photogrammetry is, the Victorians invented it. And basically they realized that from a number of photographs you could extract measurement. And so video cameras are essentially producing many single image pictures, and from still images or from video you can extract measurement. So if you watch a feature film such as any Harry Potter film where there's a dragon in the scene, or a character wandering around that's obviously a computer graphic character, what they've done is they've filmed the scene, given it to the computer and said recreate that scene digitally, and then they then can recreate the floor and the camera movement. So it's used everywhere you see. But one of the things you can also do with it is to photograph a building, give it to the computer. You might take 100 pictures for one building, give it to the computer, and the computer aligns all the pictures and extracts measurements from it, and then gives you a 3D building back in colour with all the right textures, and you have a virtual building. So recently on one of the projects I'm working on, which is to do with a historic navvy building, a heritage kind of work. This building is one of the rarest buildings in the UK that represents the building of a reservoir. And we've gone in and photographed it with 700 photographs on the internal aspect of it. You give that to the computer and it rebuilds it in 3D for you.
Fascinating. Gosh, it feels a very intense sort of way forward. Now, what you were saying was very science fiction-y. It was almost like the future, being able to talk with your great-great-granddaughter and things like this. I mean, you're actually sort of pioneering in this. But one of the things I think is quite interesting, if anyone's seen the film Gattaca, which is all about the future and everyone has to get born by artificial insemination, and the ones who are invalids can't be part of society. The character that Jude Law plays becomes disabled and has a wheelchair. And even though they're far into the future, his wheelchair is like a 1940s stainless steel NHS piece of equipment. And it's like, how can we actually get people to take us seriously? And they always seem to put us into that place of other, and we cope with the horrid bits of life, and we're not supposed to want to be really in the now and the know and develop future work. Because I want to see this happening more with the artists in Wales, that they start to think ahead and do things that are going to be groundbreaking. What do we need to do to change some of the understanding around what disabled artists can actually contribute to the whole creative technology world? I don't know if Nicola wants to have a go at answering that.
I think that's an impossible question, because it kind of flips around the other way. Is what do disabled artists need from us as curators and providers of platforms and opportunities for art and creative technology? What should we be providing? And online residencies and support. So for the Fact Together residencies, we put them out to artists who maybe had no experience of creating an online work or a digital work at all. So anyone could apply. It could be a poet, it could have been a dancer, whatever. And then we have the technical skills to support them. If they wanted to create an app or a computer game, that we have the technical skills to be able to support them to do that. So that's so my question kind of flips the other way. Is like, what can we do to support more disabled artists to create the work that is within them?
Great, because that's a provocation you've thrown out to the room, so we're hoping some of them will come back with answers for that later. Simon, can you respond to what I said before?
Yeah, I think there needs to be, I'm going to use the word brave, and I mean that only in the sense of ambition and thoughtfulness. So when I mentioned before the idea that we would be able to talk to our dead relatives digitally, this year in South Korea, 4 or 5 months ago, the first experiment in that area launched. A South Korean company recreated a digital scene using VR, AR, and green screen and so on. And a mother met her daughter who had died aged 3, and she was able to walk up to her, using haptic touch this daughter. In the headset, she was able to see a very realistic version of her daughter who acted, talked, and responded to what she did. And this was all fairly cumbersome, but this is now, and I'm talking 20, 30 years time. And it was a worldwide story, and it's built on the kind of technology that I was discussing earlier, built on computer game technology principally, but it's built on haptic touch. Haptic touch is the way that computers are able to give you feedback, and as if you're touching a real object. Sound and the environment and so on. And that bravery of that company, I mean, I found it a deeply disturbing work, but many people I spoke to said it could actually be really consoling, and they had completely different views than me. I just thought it was perhaps morally not the right idea, but quite a lot of people, including lots of mothers, said to me that actually maybe it was a really good thing to do with dealing with grief and so on. So I think bravery is one thing in terms of actually stretching the limits of what we're actually capable of perceiving digitally, and then, but also bravery from the commissioners to accept the fact that disabled people should not be judged in the same way. And what I mean by that is, so during Cork Ignite, I had an application process for people to work with me on the project. The reason why I did that is I wanted a commitment for people to stay with me. And so people applied to it, but I made sure the application process was absolutely entirely accessible. So somebody who was Down syndrome was as able to apply as somebody who was deaf. And so and what you get is at the start of the project, we had a lovely repository of applications that were really engaging. And then it let me learn about the people that I was going to work with before the first workshop took place, because I was remote in Ireland, and the project was in Ireland. So I think the ability not to use some of what we do in as standard techniques, but to really think about adapting them, and not to be, quite often in conferences and some other places, I've heard about this level playing field about our work's as good as everybody else's and that. And I don't care about that, because the work of disabled people is different, because the disabled people have different life experiences which affect them both in life and in education and skills and motor abilities and lots of other areas. And so for me to be told that my work must be as good as somebody who's got an elite background and been to Cambridge and is 20 years ahead of where I'm at, I don't care. And I think it's that bravery to say, well, actually, the work of a 20-year-old Down syndrome person is really as effective and as important as the work of a 40-year-old artist who has had every opportunity by comparison given to them. And I think that's where the word bravery comes in. It's bravery in commissioning and bravery in ambition.
Brilliant. Really, it's getting us thought-provoking. And I'm going to do a last few minutes asking you certain things within the context of COVID-19 and what is actually happening to our world. I mean, when you were saying some of those things about people who are losing people, we've had things robbed off us, like funerals. Only 10 people or 6 people can go to a funeral. People aren't able to say goodbye to each other properly. There are really big things happening in society, but also for disabled people. 2/3 of the people who've died in the UK are disabled people of COVID. You know, we are really being disproportionately affected. And also those of us who have to shield, even though our shielding measures are sort of like, oh, you can go out now. And if we try to go out, the social distancing isn't there. We're scared because some of us won't survive it if we get it. And what can we do around creative technology? We've already seen, being able to do these sorts of conferences are great for Zoom. People are losing the isolation. There's issues in Wales around digital poverty, actually being able to afford equipment, but also cold spots. What do you see we could do within this field to actually keep people engaged and keep artists working? And I like the idea of residencies. What can we do to make sure ideas that fit the lived experience of disability can keep coming through? And also your point, Simon, about the fact that many people don't take us seriously. We haven't had that foundation of education yet. The lived experience brings an arts creativity in that's not necessarily there by the paperwork or exams you've got. So who wants to start first? I've got you thinking, haven't I?
Yeah, definitely.
You're right, Nicola, start.
Yeah, I never have an answer to what should people do. I've been really profoundly shocked actually through this pandemic about the language that has been used. Oh, it's all right, he died, but he had underlying health conditions. I mean, it just truly appalling othering that actually shocked me to the core. I thought we'd moved beyond that. And this you're old, you have underlying health conditions, in a way it doesn't matter. I just thought, surely this isn't the society that I thought we were moving towards, although, you know, that keeps coming up. So what can artists do? What can creative technology do? What can art do? Is what art does best, is it puts out different images and different stories and different narratives and different symbols that say something about the society to which we aspire to, not the one that we're presented with. And that feels hugely important. And I guess the nice thing about an art and creative technology organization is I don't feel, I mean, I don't have your knowledge actually, Simon, of art history, but I don't feel trapped by having to work with the usual suspect artists. I don't feel that I have to work with the artists that maybe if I was Tate, I would need to work with to bring in the audiences in. I have a bit more freedom than that, I think, to work with any artist that I find exciting or has something to say. And I also now have the freedom to do a lot more online because we're showing that it's worked to be able to work online in a very different social way.
I mean, for me, I think the fact that the emergence of technology has led to these mega cities that are now in China and around the world, which then contributes to global warming, contributes to the pandemic and so on. But at the same time, the technology has rescued us. If we can imagine this situation 10 or even 20 years ago, this would have been catastrophic in so many ways without the technology. Very simply, all the people who've been isolating on their own for months and months, how would we have even dealt with that? And of course, Zoom that we're now using has been central to accessibility. And for me, I feel more accessible to my workplace and more accessible to lots of things. I'm not trying to travel across the country in winter where sometimes I don't enjoy it and I feel dangerous. Just falling over for me can be dangerous. So actually, in some senses, although I do take on board fully that technology isn't for everybody and that there's technological poverty on a big scale, I do think that technology does offer us a real way forward, and the fact that so many people are now adapted to working from home, there's so many good benefits that I hope we don't lose. In terms of how we can fix technical poverty, you've got people, big companies like Facebook who are looking at fixing technical poverty in Africa on a grand scale by making the internet freely available through satellite technology, and these kind of really interesting approaches. Whether technology can be used for good is a really difficult kind of thing, really. A couple of years ago, I was involved in a technology exhibition in the Czech Republic, which was a dystopian technology exhibition, and one of the really brilliant exhibits there was a lead box with everything covered in lead, with the person inside would be covered in lead because then it could be shielded from mobile phones, from telephones, from TV transmissions and everything. So we can go one way and reject technology, or we can accept it and try and manage it so that it works well. I've used for a long time facial recognition in animation, for instance. And what a shame that facial recognition is now used for policing, for negative kind of solutions. So I think technology can be used creatively for great things. And it's our job to argue that technology should be used for great things, but also to argue that technology should not be used badly and should be used considerately. So I hope that the contribution of technology to our lives generally, as we've seen through the pandemic, will be a positive thing. And that's what I hope for. And I think, as Nicola said, that's what art should do. It should point out new avenues of exploration and lead us somewhere, lead us into, hopefully, better positions and better consideration for each other.
Yeah, it's what we want. Really is what we need to do. It is scary, some of the messages that are out there. I mean, we did get challenged before. We shouldn't be using social isolation because we don't want to be socially isolated from each other. We need to be physically isolated from each other so we can start to reclaim back the language we want. But one of the policies that the UK was really putting at the start of the pandemic, before the lockdown, was herd immunity, which actually was a very dangerous policy, because for many of us, that would mean our lives aren't valid and you can get rid of us. It's just a nice, fit, healthy people they want in society. Austerity measures and what we've had to deal with over the last 10 years have actually sort of, I'm sorry I'm getting a bit political, but they have actually had a massive impact on how disabled people can get into working in the arts particularly. We have got good arts organisations in terms of the councils who are putting equality measures in place, but we still come across barriers. And I think we're going to actually look at some of those barriers with some of the questions after we've had a short break. But I think I'd like everyone in the room to think about some of the things they would really like to ask Nicola and Simon around their expertise in this field. And also some solutions to some of the issues they may have raised, or some ideas you may have had, which will be really interesting to hear from you. We're going to have a 10-minute break, if that's okay, because the Zoom's great, but it can be a bit worry. So we've always built these little breaks in, so people can just switch off for a bit and then come back. I'm going to ask you to come back in the room just before for 5 o'clock, and we're only going to actually go on for the next 30 minutes and close it by 5:30, if that's okay. So do you guys want to say anything else before we go off for a break? No, Rachel, got anything you want to share?
Just I'll be converting everyone again during the break so that you'll be in the room. If you want to be in the room, leave your video off if you don't want to be in the room. Okay.
All right, thank you so much so far. And exposing your thinking is what we need to move things on. But I do so believe what Nicola said about, it's about getting people's stories out there and the artist approach. We need to hear it. All the systems we're working with at the moment make us feel we're not valid and we don't want to say things. We've got to keep talking. We've got to keep saying it as it is. Okay, so see you all just before 5 o'clock. Have a nice break. Thank you.
I'm just going to step away for a minute. This is Wendy. I'll be right back, okay?
Thanks, Simon. Hi, Nicola. Thank you. Hope you're okay with the pace of this. Yep. We've got everyone back in the room. If people want to let us see themselves, we're really, it gives us a sense of community if we can see your faces. So only do if you feel free to do that. Hello, Maura. Okay, I think we're all back. Have we got Wendy? Yep.
Yep.
We've got the subtitles working and captioning. Hope everyone's comfortable. Now we've hit on some big issues, but I just have a context about doing this work is Rachel is now the newly appointed National Officer for Creative Technology across Wales, and we have had a change in the membership. Some people have been a bit worried about what all that means, but it is about being able to serve the members across Wales, to give them specialist help and support in terms of their career choices, and also for you to inform us of things that we can do. We have got some projects in the pipeline that we hope will get funding for. Some of them are HE funded, Simon, so I may talk to you about it at some point. But we really want you to think about your art practice and ask questions to these incredibly knowledgeable people about stuff. I am going to kick off because we did have one that came through around assessments when it was Jude. Jude, would you like to ask your question yourself? Are you there? I'm just trying to find it. Yeah, is Jude there?
Yeah,
Brilliant.
here I am. I'm multitasking. Yes, around assessments, I find that all the way through university, and I've done a number of degrees and masters, that my special educational needs have never really been considered, and I've always had to fit in the same box as everyone else, and that goes with disability as well. You know, when you're expected to sort of drag yourself about to different places, and there's never any sort of adjustments made for you or things like that. So I find the academic environment a bit of a challenge, I'd say, putting it mildly.
I think a lot of people do, and I think that's why, you know, I was reading an article yesterday on a type of school in the Netherlands which doesn't have a curriculum. It's not quite a Steiner school, and it's just, but it's a national school. It's anybody can go there, and basically, children are expected to know what Pythagoras' theorem is by a certain point in time, but how they achieve that is by whatever method. So, for instance, one child achieved it by trying to decorate his desk with half a car and realised that he couldn't fit it into the lift to get it there. And so he learned about volume and learned about all kinds of different processes to actually remake his desk at school. That is a totally different approach to assessment, the curriculum, everything. And I think we don't just have to accept the status quo. What is the method in universities now? It doesn't have to be the method for art and design in the future.
You've got any views, Nicola, on that?
On higher education? God, I got out of that quite quickly, actually. Yeah, I was developing a dual career, running Arts Catalyst and heading off towards being an academic, but I can't say it was working for me terribly well, to be honest, and I'm quite glad I don't have to negotiate that anymore, even as a non-disabled person.
I mean, there's quite a few lecturers I know of who have actually had some really awful experiences of their access needs not even being met by the universities. And I know people have had to leave jobs because of the way they've been treated as disabled people at that level. So, you just don't know what's going to happen with students, you know. There's a lot of work to do. One of the things that bothers me is some of the research grants and the work that is the opportunities of funding that's out there tends to be assessed by non-disability experience. And I do talk about the notion of a non-disability privilege that people go through. I think there's nothing like the lived experience. I also think that affects people who have children or siblings who, there is a different way we have to live when disability becomes part of our lives. And we don't give it too much airways because the way the system seems to be led is around very ableism, privileged people getting into those places. So we've got a lot of systems to challenge, really. But saying that, I mean, more, sorry, I'm just looking up make sure I get, it was Ju brought it, you've done really well considering you've managed to get a few degrees, you said, and MAs. So
well, I'm trying now to do a PhD, but it'll be on synesthesia, because I have synesthesia as part of my autism, which I didn't. I thought everybody had experienced sound the same way that I did. Obviously, that led me into sound engineering and stuff like that. But I'm hoping to, as part of the PhD, to not only research it from the person who has its lived experience, but to actually share that as an installation, as a final work piece, because a lot of the research that's done on us is done by people that don't have our conditions or don't have our lived experiences. And a lot of the research has been done on children, you know, why you don't like certain sounds and go running off. But there's never the experience of an older person that sort of navigated their way through life with these conditions that can help people that are younger with similar conditions actually give them some sort of insight and some lived experience to help them manage their way through their life with the similar, you know, lived condition. So I found that when I used to work as a counsellor, that people's lived experience when I was working with them about their trauma taught me more about counselling and working with people than actually any academic textbook I had did. And I find now that even like on my last year, I've just done an electronic music degree, but even on the last year of my course, when you go to get feedback, the teacher goes, "Oh, here's your feedback," and you go, "I can't read. You're gonna have to tell me what it says." But people can't understand why you seem so educated and so well versed and spoken, why you can't read. It doesn't tie up for them. They can't get their head around it, you know.
And it's because they're not exposed to it from as ordinary. Always we seem to be putting disability in a different place. Simon, you've had an amazing career in your university life. Have you ever, but what I've noticed is you tend to stay with Teesside. Have you ever gone into any other universities? And did you find you've had the right approach? Or have you had to do what a lot of disabled people have to do, is go in there and challenge them and tell them where they're wrong and have to work on that side of your work to be able to do the work you want to do?
At Teesside, I found they were very open, actually. Teesside is an unusual university. I think because there's different types of universities in the UK, and there's the Russell Group universities, what are called red brick universities, which are the old original universities, and then universities which are much younger, like Teesside, which were effectively polytechnics in the past and became universities relatively recently. And because Teesside is a university in the heart of it's got a lot of issues to deal with in terms, you know, regionally in the northeast, you would say there's issues of unemployment and various other things going on. It was always an open university in terms of who it accepted and what its ambitions were. Its ambitions weren't to be world leading in challenge Cambridge. Its ambitions were far more social from the onset, and I think that was really interesting. And so they've been really receptive to the idea of considering the role and nature of disability and the creative side of that as well. And so they've empowered, you know, it's empowering. And I fully appreciate what Nicola said about, you know, keeping away from education in one sense, because it is quite hard and really difficult to deal with. But in another way, for me, what I've enjoyed about it is it's made me, which is somebody who, I know several people with PhDs who are disabled, none of whom left school with any education. And so, that is historically common. You know, sort of disabled people, deaf people have very poor educational experiences. And so, for me, the university has been very, very interesting to become educated in. You know, to do a PhD there, to become a senior member of staff there, it's been an interesting process. And I'm with people who come from similar backgrounds. So it's not an elitist place. But I think if I'd have been in a university that was far more elitist, I probably wouldn't have been able to stay the course. So it's been, you know, it's been a very interesting process. It hasn't all been roses. It's been very difficult, but I have had really great support from key individuals and departments and so on, who've really taken on board that message of equality, really.
What's been really interesting for me being in Wales is just how realising the devolved governments actually can have more sort of weight on some of the things that happen. For example, they've got a new document out, Future Generations, and they're looking at the way the education system can be changed. Someone's put in there about how the recent changes in Wales could, if harnessed, provide a much broader education for people. It was all put in place before the lockdown, but it's like what could go on now could change things dramatically. We were talking before about people who aren't living with shielding issues and whatever, even people who just feel vulnerable, not really getting out there, and how I'm so aware I've got to keep shielding, and this is how we communicate. Most of us are communicating through Zoom, but then there could be a point when people are coming out and lockdown is easing that we won't be allowed back in the room at all. And because we're at the mercy of other people to allow us in, how can we keep our voices going to make sure we can be part of the whole development around creative technologies as artists? I don't know if anyone who's in the Wales group has any sort of experiences of how they've seen education change in terms of their arts practice and training. Anyone want to offer any thoughts?
I think you need to sort of develop it as your own scene and drive it forward. I found that because I'm part of a women's collective with music, and we weren't being represented on lineups within hip hop and grime, drum and bass, electronic, and sort of different music genres. So what we did was we come together and we created our own scene. We've driven it to a point now where we're recognised. We've opened for Kate Tempest in the tram shed, and we're getting somewhere. Obviously COVID came along and washed it all away for the moment, but if you're driving a scene, and you will get, eventually that hard work will pay off, but you need to come together as more of a collective and drive it forward as a collective, and just keep banging on the door all the time till they let you in. And the work will start speaking for itself. But it is extremely difficult. I found that the lockdown, where I can do stuff from my own house, Zoom in and Skype in, I've been to workshops all over the world that I could never normally get to. So there's been good parts of this experience, and the fact that people now got to send me their work and I mix and master at home in my studio, and I don't have to see people. They don't, they don't come to the house now like they used to. So that's good as well, because I got a bit of an obsession with cleaning. So now that's easier to manage. But I think that you've got to start from somewhere and go, right, well, this is what we'd like, this is what we want. Let's achieve it and let's move towards it, and just keep moving forward, and not going into the box that other society is trying to push you into all the time, because we're always trying to fit into the able-bodied person's box, and we will never fit in it. So let's just say, right, we're not fitting in your box, we're going to do our own thing, make our own box with loads of different shapes and colours in it, and this is what we're going to do, and move it forward as a movement. and that then will generate its own interest and its own steam and its own following, and become something bigger than the sum of one person just constantly banging at something that's not getting nowhere all the time.
Right.
That's my 2 pence anyway.
No, you've had some really great points there. I actually think there's some people in the room who are visual artists who are used to putting their work into galleries and things. Is there anything that's been said today that makes you think differently about the way you would work with your visual arts offer, or any issues you feel about getting visual arts organisations to take your work seriously, or other or art forms as well? Sorry, not just visual arts. Anyone? No, you're very quiet today. I think we've.
Well, I'll just say.
Oh, yeah, Maura, go on.
Well, I was just going to say that the last commission that I actually did, which was several years ago now, was actually online. I didn't actually have. It was a language-based thing, and that was just brilliant. It was the one reason. It was one big reason for actually applying for it, because I didn't have to travel so much, and I didn't have to be resident. It was a residency, but online. So, there's little changes are occurring and making things more possible. I just, there are restrictions like rural broadband. That's,
yes.
That's one of my big issues.
Yeah, I'm trying to influence some digital Wales to actually think about the issues, and I think everyone who's disabled or over a certain age should get free Wi-Fi and free equipment, because it actually can be used for hospital visits rather than physically having to go, and it can actually save society money. But no one seems to be joining up the dots and thinking about this, so there's a lot of work to do. Okay. I want to be a bit provocative because I want to get some good thinking in here. Simon, have you ever had to come across a piece of work which you just felt you hit a wall and you couldn't go through it? People just didn't get it from your disability perspective. Is it fair to ask you something like that? I mean, you are so lovely. I think everyone would always want to work with you, but we do face those things where people just look blank and you can't get through. How can we?
I think it's really difficult. I think initially it's really difficult, but I think the whole Zoom experience for everybody. I mean, I often, when I'm talking with curators, they often might say, well, actually, my only experience I can compare disability to is, for instance, when I had a child. Both, particularly with women carrying the child and how that affected them, but also in the aftermath of the child as well, in terms of kind of the limitations and so on that occur. And the pandemic has kind of brought that lockdown experience to a lot of people, and Nicola mentioned this earlier, and it allows people to perhaps become more sympathetic and more knowledgeable, because we don't need sympathy, we just need more knowledge of what it's like to be a disabled person, and therefore how you can contribute. One of my friends has 5 personal assistants, and yet he's a super clever academic, and in receipt of a very large grant to do some amazing research and so on. And for me, I'm just thinking, I often think about Stephen Hawking's. When we talk about the pandemic, we should also be talking about the role of artificial intelligence and machine learning, because not only has the pandemic changed the way that we work, the next big challenge, the other big challenges that are not going away are artificial intelligence, machine learning, global warming and so on. And before Stephen Hawking died, he said that artificial intelligence was perhaps one of the biggest threats to humanity. And what he meant by that, he didn't mean necessarily war and hunger and so on. He actually meant how we're actually going to function as a society. And I think art, in its use of things like artificial intelligence and so on, and the way we can interrogate them and play with it, we can actually start to raise these key issues, because we're almost daydreaming into situations where the government's pursuing lots of research in artificial intelligence, and probably rightly so. But how do we then, as a society, function when many of the jobs, for instance, self-driven cars, self-driven trucks, people have got self-driven hoovers and lawnmowers that cut grass. What happens when that gets bigger, but also when it starts to populate, the more blue chip, if you like, jobs that can be replaced by artificially intelligent machines that can make instant decisions quickly, that are just overseen by a very, very small group of people. And so you can shrink workforces, you can shrink the big businesses in London that look after finance and stuff. How then do we do that? Do we then start looking at universal income for everybody? And if we do look at that, then do we start looking at actually what do people do? And of course, art's got this wonderful place to fill in our gap. But we are looking at serious challenges in the next 10, 20, 30 years in terms of what people will actually do in their life. And that, to me, is one of the most important areas of technology in terms of what it can actually help answer, because it's like, what will you actually do? And so Zoom and the whole pandemic experience is kind of a learning process towards that, because we've been told we've got to stay at home because we have to. But what happens when, as Nicola mentioned earlier, with young people who were affected by the pandemic, they're also going to be the people affected by unemployment, by artificial intelligence, by machine learning going into the future. So what are people going to do? And I think it's a really interesting thing, and art sort of can be the thing that provides social cohesion, expression, and you know, wonder and amazement to help bring us all together.
Yeah. And I think it's important that we feel we've got a conduit to get those issues out there and those stories and those ideas. And I just wondering that if there's anyone in the room who's got any arts ideas that they're thinking of around creative technology and they could embed it that they'd like to share. I know probably if you've just formulated something, it may not be ready to be shared. I just thought in terms of Nicola and Simon, it could be useful. Nicola, have you got anything to add to what the conversation we just had?
I mean, just picking up on what Simon was saying, I think that critical art aspect of art is so important. I remember because people can tend to adopt creative technology quite uncritically. They get very excited by it. It was the same when I was working in art and science, is that they get seduced by the science and the technology and the shiny, shiny stuff and a little bit overwhelmed by it. And tend to forget that one of our roles as artists is to be critical, is to interrogate, is to problematize things. I remember mentoring a Northwest art and technology scheme, and realizing there was, and I was brought in as a mentor to try and introduce the notion of critical art in relation to technology. And I think that's an area that disabled artists are probably quite well positioned to tackle, because you go through life having to critique the systems that are put in place that are not working. And here we have a whole bunch of new systems coming in place that are not going to be working in the future because we haven't thought them through. And that is such an important function of art, as well as the transformative, as well as the social connectedness, and as well as the visionary. That way of interrogating technology and science and society is going to be so important.
Yeah, it's good to actually think on those sort of things. Yeah. No one seems to be putting any other questions in there. Yeah, the thing that Maura just said about it is our lives, it's our stories, it's our lived experiences, and how we can go forward on that. I mean, I do challenge people in the room to actually think if there's anything more DAC can do to support you. I'm not sure if Nicola and Simon are aware, but there's quite a big membership here of disabled and deaf artists as part of DAC, Disability Arts Cymru, and I really want to make sure we can be pushing ahead on some of these opportunities to make art when we are living with so many diverse issues that we have to deal with as a nation. The lack of money we get, for one, the nature of the landscape, which means transport's affected. The trains stop at, I think, is it Milford Haven or one of the towns there, and there's no more trains into West Wales, and there's a whole gap that not serviced by stuff, and but also the lack of digital connectivity is a real issue. I mean, I did see last week in Kenya, they used a balloon to get a satellite up in the middle of nowhere in Kenya. Why can't we do something similar here in some of the cold spots in Wales in the mountains. We should be able to, living in the UK. So there's some major issues that we need to address.
Isn't it a village in Wales that's laid their own broadband and now have one of the fastest broadband connections in the UK? And they kind of did it themselves. Jude nodding.
Sorry, Nicola. It's a really good story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Picture of them digging their own ditches to put it in, and it's a hugely fast connection, isn't it? It's like 1,000 gigs or something.
Right, we all live in there. Yeah, right. Anyone know what the village is called?
I imagine you can Google it in a flash, because it was a good bit of news quite recently. Okay, and I just got so struck by that kind of self-determined. I've always been, I mean, I'm known for dealing with kind of high-tech stuff, but I've also been very, very interested in the low-tech, in people who appropriate different technologies and use them. And so I got quite excited by that. Taking technology and assuming that we can understand it and assuming that we can use it and just getting on with it. I thought it was a very inspiring story.
It looks like it's been put into the link, actually. Could you say what village it was?
Michaelston of Edu.
Okay.
It was on the I think it was a Guardian article, and I think it was on the BBC as well. It's just not far from Cardiff. It's about 10 miles out of Cardiff.
Right.
And they couldn't put up with it any longer. It was, just doing their heads in. So
that's always a good motivation to create.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? A necessity in that. And so it's Michaelston of Edu, just outside of Cardiff.
Okay. Someone put in the chat room about Pembrokeshire's looking at getting everyone fibre linked and things. And there are some issues. There's still some conspiracy theories out there about 5G. So it's not an easy ride for people's choices and whatever. We're going to start to bring it to an end, but I just want to ask Nicola and Simon, what do you think the future is going to look like in terms of creative technology in any form? Coming from your work, I mean, it could be from you, Nicola, in terms of what you want to do in FACT in Liverpool. I don't know if we've actually explained that FACT stands for the Foundation for Arts and Creative Technology, and they have always done and will continue to do under Nicola's leadership some fantastic groundbreaking work. But what kind of things do you see the future can do, particularly around the creative technology area?
It's really interesting now because we were getting known for doing really exciting VR stuff and interactive stuff, and I think now we have to rethink everything if we're going into a new era of pandemics, and it doesn't look like this will be a one-off, or we certainly can't assume that it's going to be a one-off. So we have to think about how we move things online, and there should be free Wi-Fi for everyone, not just for people over a certain age. I mean, that was what Corbyn was talking about. There should be free Wi-Fi, and there should be access to Wi-Fi technology for people, because it will just stimulate the economy and education systems, particularly if we're going to have to be more and more online. We can't have a divided society. But I'm really interested in how, and always have been interested in this idea of conversion, of how we take the technologies that have been developed through the military industrial complex, and we make them and we appropriate them for civilian and citizen use. And I've worked with a number of artists who've done that in quite dramatic ways, appropriating space technology and unmanned aerial vehicle technologies. And they do it they do it in a real way, but they do it in a symbolic way. And I think that's a really interesting area to really interrogate, is how we democratize technologies.
Yeah, I would pick up on what Nicola said. I think that where technology comes from can be deeply conflicting. So the research and development of technology can come from the military, can come from multiple sources, but ultimately through Moore's law, which Moore's law says that basically technology will get better and cheaper, essentially, over a consistent period. And I think that that's continued to happen. And so the technology, like for instance, everybody now can edit on the phone. You can do 3D scanning on your phone. You can do so much on your phone that even 10 years ago would be very expensive. So we're in a situation now where technology is consistently getting more and more accessible. And the bigger companies like Adobe are trying to make it less accessible by making it quite expensive to rent on a monthly basis and so on. So you're getting, as technology shrinks and becomes easy to do, the companies are struggling to make people pay for it, so they're turning it into subscriptions and so on, which is a fine thing to do. It's a good business model. But at the same time, you've got lots of open source that mirrors that is software that's free for people to use. So there's still a campaign to keep a lot of the digital tools accessible. And as hardware shrinks as well, we will see things becoming much easier to become touchable. So with a thing called LiDAR scanning, we can take these very small devices, put them near a surface and make that surface touchable. And I think that's really exciting, that we can make our environment respond to small computers and more touchable. And so the future for me is miniaturization, less cost, and perhaps a divergence between the paid software level and the free software level. I think that might be an area of contention for a lot of people. But ultimately, hopefully, artists will always find a way to bridge that gap and do something really exciting and challenging in the middle that raises critical issues and ethical issues, but also just fun. I mean, one of my favourite pieces of work with technology is the artists and the farmers who put LED lights on sheep and rounded them up on the field in the dark and did these wonderful outdoor displays. And yet it's such a simple thing to do, but it just required that vision to go, it's really dark out here, let's put an LED light on the sheep and see what happens. Just fabulous. And so for me, it's also about having great fun with technology. It's not, we can be very serious about technology, but it also should just be something that makes you giggle.
I always love the ideas of, as an Indian Japanese artist actually that I work with called Ashok Sukumaran, and I don't think he's actually written it anywhere. I just saw it in a kind of loose piece of writing that he'd done around this idea of leakage, that as technology develops, more and more systems go into trying to fence it in and stop people having access to it. But particularly in India, they're very good at hacking the system. You know, they'll hack the electricity system. And so the system leaks, and it's those areas of leakage perhaps that we have some opportunities as well.
I think a lot of disabled people have areas of leakage. So it's kind of one of those things. Anyway, we're going to draw it to a close now. I'm going to hand over to Rachel to just finish off on a few things and put a couple of links in there. We've got another talk tomorrow around the DAC Visual Arts exhibition that's being hosted by Kinnon Valley. And then on Saturday, we've got the amazing Leroy Moore, who's going to be doing a partnership talk with Avon Cymru and ourselves on hip hop and music and politicizing the message of hip hop. That would be really exciting. So the links are in the chat if you want them. But can we just do a hand wave to thank Simon and Nicola for their time, and thank Rachel for all she's done. And thank you so much for coming. Rachel's put the poll up, so if you wouldn't mind just filling that in. We do want to hear back from you, because this has been our first series on creative technology, and we want to make it happen again, make it bigger and better, so your ideas matter. But thank you so much for being part of this, and we really do hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks so much, Simon and Nicola. What you've shared has just been quite amazing. We could go on forever, but we've got to go and get food or go off to other meetings or whatever. And I think we lost a lot of people because the sun's come out, and the sun hasn't been coming out very much. That probably was why we didn't get the full thing, but we've recorded it. It will be available, so we'll be able to take this forward. Over to you, Rach.
What's left to say except thank you very much to everybody that's given their time to talk, to present, to come and watch and ask questions, and just make it not be a total flop. That's great for me. Very happy. That's it. Thank you. Thank you.